You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And as you know, here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And that education takes the place of my take for this morning. I have a take on Corona chaos, revealing autocrats and democracies part 2. I'll share that with you next week. Now, I have one of my guests in the studio, Dr. Anthony Nsia-Sari. He's a presidential advisor on health. As you may have known him long before he became the presidential advisor on health, he was the boss at the Ghana Health Service. And before that, for many years, he was the CEO of the Konfanochi Teaching Hospital. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us, Doc.
Good morning, Sam.
Great.
How are you?
I'm very good, by God's grace. Thank you. Dr. Justice Yankson, who is General Secretary of the Ghana Medical Association, should join us. And on Skype, we have Dr. John Amwesi. He's lecturer, Global Health Department, School of Public Health, KNUST, and leader, Global Health and Infectious Diseases Research Group at the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research in Tropical Medicine. Thank you very much once again, Dr. John Amwesi, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Samson. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Right. Many of our viewers across the globe have been very appreciative of the education that you have been giving on this show. So we are very grateful that you can make time to join us as and when we call upon you. Now, I'd like us to begin by listening to the president give us the update as Ghana's corona virus situation is. Right after that update, we will suspend talking about the, what the finance minister calls the Santa Claus, interventions that government, has to make. And then we will deal with this issue regarding where Ghana is as far as the coronavirus time clock is concerned. And when is Ghana expecting to begin to flatten the curve? Where is Ghana now, and when is Ghana expecting to flatten the curve? These are important clinical matters that we need to settle to get the most assurance about what is going on. So let's listen to the president first.
105 of the confirmed cases came from those who were mandatorily quarantined and tested on their arrival in our country on 21st and 22nd March. 192 of the cases came from travelers who entered the country before the closure and their contacts. 79% of the 378 confirmed cases are thus imported. We now have in total 378 confirmed cases of infections, with 6 deaths, 4 recoveries, 2 in critical condition, and the remaining 370 are mild cases who are in isolation and either being managed at home or at treatment centers. Fellow Ghanaians, I've come to ask for your continued patience as we continue to implement and extend the efforts that have so far proven to be helpful. It is important that we stay the course and bear with the difficulties that come with it. The final result, hopefully, will be freedom from the virus. So the decision has been taken through the issuance of another executive instrument to extend the restriction on movements in the Greater Accra metropolitan area and Kaswa, and the Greater Kumasi metropolitan area and its contiguous districts by 1 more week, beginning 1 a.m. on Monday the 13th of April, subject to review. Our focus on the 3 T's, that is tracing, testing, and treatment. We now see that the decision to close down our borders has been justified. 105 of the confirmed cases came from those who were mandatorily quarantined and tested on their arrival in our country on 21st and 22nd March. 192 of the cases came from travelers who entered the country before the closure and their contacts. 79% of the 378 confirmed cases are thus imported. Clearly, until we have the situation fully under control, we cannot at this time open our borders. They will have to remain shut until further notice.
So that was the president in his 6th address to the nation, doing an extension of the measured lockdown, an extension in time, not extension in geography. We will ask what the effect of all of that is because of the new discoveries or tests in other places that had no cases at the time the lockdown was announced. So I'll begin with Dr. John Amoesi, who is with us on Skype. And Doc, I wrote this question for you. Now we know decidedly that the initial claims of black invulnerability or a level of invulnerability by Africans is false. Minority black communities in America are worse hit or affected, accounting in some places for 70%, like in Chicago, and 41% in Illinois. That's the debt that blacks communities are accounting for. Last week, global infection rate hit 1 million mark. We are now very close to 2 million, and very insignificant recoveries looking at the infection rate and death toll. How are you, scientists and researchers, analyzing this in the face of the increased preaching of the practices of hand washing, etc., and the lockdown?
Thank you very much for that, Samson. And I want to say good morning to all your listeners. And if you just spare me just a couple of seconds to eulogize my teacher, Professor Jacob Langeroux, who passed away yesterday, as you may have heard. A great man, great gentleman by all standards. We're all deeply saddened within the medical fraternity. And I just want to, celebrate him this morning and believe that his legacy will carry on. So thank you very much for allowing me to do that, Samson.
Right.
In trying to understand where we have arrived at this particular moment, particularly with all the information that was going on about race and the fact that black people would not suffer as much from this, was based on 2 things. Well, the thinking that, and this again is based on where the disease started. It started in China and then moved to Europe before heading to the US as the epicenter. And so there was a general thought that, well, it's affecting people who are outside of where black people live in large numbers. There was also the question about the temperature or the weather, and the fact that in Africa, we live in a temperate zone, and so the weather is a lot hotter. And so the thinking was that we wouldn't be affected. Now it's very clear. These 2 fallacies have been debunked. And you can see clearly what you mentioned, the figures in the US with respect to black people. It's a number of things. I mean, if you look at the health spectrum in the US, you realize that black people are often in worse health than the average white person. This is a function of deep-rooted health disparities in the US with regard to access to health health practices, and several other issues. It has nothing to do with genetics in itself. All right. And then the second thing is regarding the weather. And you can see how this disease has ravaged the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, and even the first countries in Africa to have been affected. The first one was Egypt, which is a much hotter place than it is here. In Riyadh, the topping temperatures of average, 39 degrees, thereabouts, and it's really ravaging the place. So I think the earlier we dispel this notion that the black people, or where it's warm, will not be so much at risk, the better. I think it's already clear by now. And we can see these trends, panning out right before our eyes. I think that's what I'll comment on when it comes to the black person. And you need to understand that this disease affects, the lungs of people, and everybody has lungs, and everybody is made up of pretty much the same constitution. There is nothing special about any race that makes them more or less vulnerable to any particular disease, unless, of course, there are other things involved. And when it comes to this disease, this virus, you need to understand that it's a novel coronavirus. No race has had it before to have said that, we would have some immunity inbuilt, and so we would be less at risk. Nobody's had it before. It's the first time for everybody, and so everybody is equally at risk. We can see it's no respecter of socioeconomic barriers, of any kind of barriers, and it's really important that we get this straight in our minds. That's why I was really excited about your opening part, where you show the medical personnel, nurses, and other allied health professionals all pitching in different languages, trying to educate the public on the need to watch out for this danger, which is right in our midst.
Okay. So we have done about 3 months into the outbreak, and there has been an increased preaching of the preventive measures. Wash your hands, use sanitizers, don't touch your face, and so on. We are doing this very effectively all over the globe. What does that mean in the face of that and the deaths and the infection rate? Just last week, we hit the 1 million mark. As we speak, we are just about to hit the 2 million mark. We are 1,700,000 plus. What does that tell you? What is going on? What are we not doing right?
Samson, I think you asked a great question, because it allows me to explain a couple of things to our dear listeners. And I must mention again that I think the decision by the government to extend the lockdown by a week was anticipated. I'd have been really surprised if the lockdown had been called off. So I'm pretty happy that it's been extended for a week. I'm not privy to all the matrix that's being used in making decisions, but I was expecting a little more than a week based on what we're seeing. Well, that aside, it's really important to understand that when you begin to put in measures, people think that, okay, when we put in measures, we expect to see things getting better. But the truth is that when you begin to put in measures, things will often get worse before they get better. And you can see this in what's happening in many other countries. You will see a higher number of cases. You may experience a higher number of deaths. And it is at the point you begin to see a decrease in the number of daily infections that you can begin to say, all right, we may have arrived at the peak, we may be plateauing, and therefore we are in control of the curve. Right. So it was only expected that we would see our numbers shoot up, and we would maybe see a few more deaths. We're not seeing as many deaths in Ghana and other parts of Africa as is the trend in other places. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons.
Right, and I'll come to you. I'll come to you specific about the Africa situation and the Ghana situation. Why the numbers are not rising as we see elsewhere. Dr. Nsia Sari and Dr. Justice Yankson, how do you also, analyze the global situation in the midst of lockdowns and active practices of the preventive measures?
Yeah, thank you, Samson. Globally, if you look at the lockdown and the active practices like hand washing, social distancing, and the rest, you realize that the figures are going up. Dr. Amoisi was talking about the figures getting higher, and maybe you term it as getting worse. In our situation, I would say it's not getting worse. You see, the more you trace and test, the more positives you get. If you don't test at all, you won't see anything. People will be asymptomatic, go through the disease, infect other people, and they are also asymptomatic. A few of them will get very critically ill and maybe die. But if you test, you don't only test, you test, isolate, and treat. So when you trace the people, you test them, then you isolate them and treat. It means that you see all those who are positive. You isolate them so that they don't infect other people. And then you also treat, manage them, either at home or in the hospital. Once you do that, and as maybe you'll come to the Ghana situation, that we are doing a lot of tests. It's test. So when you do a lot of tests, by all means the figures will go up. It shouldn't be something which should make everybody worried that, hey, we are increasing the figures. If you ask me the figure today, I won't tell you. The more you test, the better off you are, right? The better off you are. But is Ghana really testing, as you say? We're doing very little testing, really. Comparatively, we are not testing. Ghana is testing. Ghana is testing. Maybe the rate of the samples we've collected and the testing are not matching. But Ghana has so far, as the president said, I'll give you the figures. Since we locked down the 2 cities, the limited lockdown, we've collected samples to the tune of 37,405. And we've tested about 14,000 of it. And I know that yesterday and today they are still testing. So if you look at it, compared to other countries, Ghana is testing. Ghana is testing using the PCR machines. The other countries who are testing with a rapid test. And later I will explain what the difference are. So once you are testing, because all what you are doing now, that we are not waiting for the patients to be symptomatic before you test. That's the difference between what we were doing before and what we've done now, especially at the lockdown areas. So once you continue testing almost in all the regions, and all the regions have also enhanced their surveillance and testing. And now when you bring in a lot of testing size to what we are doing now, then we realize that Ghana has done very well in terms of testing. In fact, some countries are even asking us, why are you testing people who are not symptomatic? But we tell them that this is our style. And I think we are doing the best within our limited resources. So that's what we are doing. So the whole world, if they are testing, they will get a lot of positives. Yeah, so the more you test, the more you discover. And the better position you are placed to treat and to contain. Yes. Because we have tested quite a few more in recent days, we have seen our numbers go up. If you take elsewhere, like in New York, because of the testing they are doing from the 4th, they are able to tell that they have as many as 4,000 plus who died, who got it or something, and then from the 5th you get to know the number, from the 6th you get to know the number, and the numbers continue to rise in the double digit. Because we are not doing as much, we don't know. That's the truth, isn't it? Yes, because we are not doing as much as New York is doing, we may not see the numbers as that. But you see, what we are doing now, we are doing the testing and we are going into communities. In fact, recently what we did in Accra and Kumasi is that we are not doing only for contacts. So you go to a contact that this person is positive, we do all the contacts, and also we go to about 1 to 2 kilometers radius and then try to take samples from people voluntarily. And once you take the test voluntarily, we've realized that we pick 1 or 2, which is a very good sign for us. What it means is that within that locality, if you don't pick anybody at all, it's likely that there's no community spread in that locality. Because if somebody who is positive may not be staying with somebody who is selling cocoa and nkatieh by the roadside. But because he passed there, maybe had an encounter with an Nkatie seller, he then passes on something to the woman or who is doing the cocoa and Nkatie, and then the woman doesn't even know the man. And if you test such a woman and he's positive, it means he has passed it on unknowingly to the woman, and then that's where we say that there's a community spread going on. So far, we are doing a lot of epidemiological survey, we are doing mapping and everything wherever we have tested, and we have spot spores and we have seeding spores. And what we are going to do for the next 1 week with the limited lockdown in Accra, we are going to aggressively go into the seeding hotspots. And then there are some communities which are also heavily populated within this hotspot area. So we go there. That's where the problem is. If you get people getting positive there, because there are so many of them together, because the social distancing doesn't work. So one of the most important things, something, is if you have a very good social distancing. That's the reason for the lockdown in most of the countries in the world.
Okay.
If you are able to let people stay a bit afar, then you are also not allowing the virus to be passed on to other people.
Yeah. So, Dr. Hansen, whilst we are doing all of these things aggressively and we have the lockdowns across the globe, we are still overwhelmed. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, Samson, it is so because it looks like some countries initially did not take the right steps. They hesitated, they felt that, well, this is something that was distant from us. At the time it was China and all that. If you look at the Italy situation, they were one of the first people to have had imported cases from China. But because it was located around the northern part of Italy and there wasn't so much, hullabaloo about it at the time, they were also able to take it to the nearby countries like Austria, Switzerland, Germany, So clearly there was some more or less inertia on the part of some countries to start off with. And by the time they went onto the aggressive testing mode, the whole community had been contaminated with the virus. And that is why we are seeing a lot of cases coming up through the aggressive testing they are doing now. For us as a people, I think we relatively started early. Of course, we could have probably done it a month earlier or whatever, but be that it may, we are in a position now to really appreciate that, look, there is some amount of community spread. And what that means is that we will have to double our efforts, both at the national level in terms of the health authorities and the state itself. And then the general population, our attitude will also have to be reviewed. We need to change some of the do's and don'ts that traditionally we thought was okay with us. And people should begin to appreciate the fact that the disease is here with us. For which reason, we cannot continue life, as we say, business as usual. Sometimes you go into communities to even test people who have actually been positive. You want to get in touch with their very close relatives and what have you. And there's hostilities. So we need to continue to do a lot more of the education. We need the traditional authorities, the local opinion leaders and what have you, to let people understand that the state and the health authorities are working in the interest of all of us. And that if you have to be tested, you have to avail yourself, because if you don't do that, you put the entire community, not just your immediate family, at risk.
Maybe
let me bring Dr. Mwesi in quickly.
Maybe let me add something quickly to what he said. You see, yesterday I saw a very worrying video in Kumasi, where somebody has made a video and spreading it all over that he has seen NIA vehicles going around taking people's sputum. And that from his knowledge, that Ministry of Health and Ghana Health Service has not asked anybody to go and take any sputum. So nobody should go for, allow anybody to take the sputum. You see, this is clearly misinformation. And this is what he said, that if you are not careful, the community will feel that because he doesn't have the disease, he believes that it won't happen to him. So I'm appealing to everybody that when they come to your house, that give us some sputum or give us some what they call it, they want to take a sample from you. It's from Ghana Health Service and the Ministry of Health, sanctioned by the government.
Yeah, so Dr. Mwesi, about this testing, Do you subscribe to the suggestion that we are in an aggressive testing mode? Because that's what we need.
Samson, I think you used the right word. We are in a testing mode. Aggressive is a bit difficult for me to qualify. The reason being, as Dr. Nsari mentioned, we're doing the best we can under the circumstances, but we have not yet arrived where we need to arrive. That's very important that listeners appreciate that the fact that one is doing the best that they can doesn't mean that it suffices. There is a need for a lot more testing to go on, and we need to move beyond the testing, which is of those who are positive and then their contacts, to even allow those who feel that they might have been exposed or anyone who really would want to be able to have a test. Now, this is a lot more complicated, requires a lot more resources. The question is, do we even have enough test kits? I can't answer that question. So let me reiterate once again, we are doing our best, but it is not enough. I need to tell you a little bit more about this testing. Now, in this testing, we're taking nasal swabs. So what my colleagues who are involved in the testing are doing is they put along like a cotton bud, what you use for your ears. They put it into your nose. Sometimes they go very deep, and they take a sample, they put it into a tube, and they carry it away. Now, you need to realize that this test will not always give you a positive result, even if you are positive. In fact, scientifically, they're estimating just close to about 70%. I cannot be too sure because this is based on a study that was conducted in China and was published in the New England Journal. It should tell you that even if you're positive, there may be a chance that with this nasal swab, you may not show positive.
So this not a reliable method to use.
No, it is. Let me make it clear. It is a reliable method. It is the recommended method, and it's the best we can do here. The most sensitive method is really what we call a bronchoalveolar lavage, which means you actually put a probe down into the lungs, into the little parts of the lung. You spray some fluid there and you suction that fluid, or you take that fluid and go and test it. We just don't have the capacity to do that. It's something that is done, often in intensive care under very specialized conditions. So forget about that. But it's just important for people to realize. So don't be surprised if someone tested negative and later test positive. It could be that they were not yet positive, but it could also be that it was a false negative. Now, regarding the testing, what I really believe we need to, in order to be able to appreciate the level of exposure that we have had in this country, would be serological tests. When I say serological tests, what I mean is taking your blood samples and testing to see whether somebody has antibodies to the coronavirus. What this would tell you is that this person has been exposed, has come into contact with the coronavirus. Because our testing capacity for the coronavirus by way of taking the nasal swabs is limited, if we really want to have some estimate of how much we have exposed, I would recommend that we have what we call sentinel sites, where we do the serological testing, look at the antibody levels within the community, and that should give us a fair idea. So you have a hotspot, you take blood samples in addition, do serological tests, it will give you a fair idea as to the levels of exposure. We can balance that together with the actual PCR testing we are doing, and it will help us to be able to have some idea of the real picture regarding what's going on. And I totally support Dr. Nsari's recommendation to everybody to really support the testing. Don't be afraid of testing. Encourage someone who's possibly been exposed to go for a test. When you see the NRA vehicle, the Ghana Health Service vehicle, encourage them, cheer them on. Let's behave like those in Europe who are clapping for health personnel and people who are going around. Let's make them feel that we appreciate them and we understand what they're doing.
This analysis brings me to a feeling. Do I feel right when I feel we were a little late in effectively containing the spread by what seemed to be indecision to quickly lock down? How concerned, I'm sure you are not surprised though, how concerned are you about a potential rise in spread across the country, even in communities you may not have imagined or expected to record a case, at least not now?
Thanks, Samson. To say we were late is it's a very complicated thing. Of course, we were late. Everybody was late. This is very clear. Everybody has been late. But the question is, did we make the decision when we had the opportunity or enough information to make a decision? And I can say that, yes, at the point where we had to make a decision and there was enough information, we made the decision. It would have been beautiful if it had been taken earlier. But the circumstances under which we were, the amount of information that was available at the time would have made it very, very difficult. In fact, if we had shut down earlier and this had happened, it would have just been a pure stroke of luck or just mere speculation. But you cannot shut down a whole country based on mere speculation. You have to look at the figures and put in place things before you lock down. So I would have been surprised if even a couple of days had gone past the date which the president announced a lockdown, because I was expecting that it should happen just about then. So I think I would say, based on what we knew and what we had, we took the decision at the right time. It would have been better if it was earlier, but I don't think much would have been done about that.
When you enter the cycle, we are told that you have 2 to 3 weeks before you get to the turnaround.
Yep.
Does it feel like Ghana is actually now entering the circle? When is a turnaround expected? Do we have a scientific basis, given the low numbers of testing we are doing, to project a turnaround time?
No, great question, Samson. And this is exactly the reason why I brought in the serological testing. Now, if you look at our graphs are a bit erratic because we are adding on the numbers as and when we do this enhanced surveillance, all right? So you have a bunch of 10 being added, then you have 1, then maybe we have 15. This is based on what we are doing, the best that we can do. Ideally, you want to see a much smoother curve. We do not have that. And even with our, a bit of a bumpy curve, we cannot by any measure say that we have arrived at the peak, let alone the plateau. And it's difficult to project when we will hit the peak. I have to be really honest with you, based on our limited ability to test. So my recommendation would be, let us include serological tests here, measure levels of exposure. When you have that, it gives you a fair idea of what the reality may be based on your limited ability to test. And only with that can you make certain projections about the level of exposure, the actual numbers infected, and when we might hit the peak. And then that would inform when we could ease the lockdown if we think it is being effective enough. And again, I need to reiterate, lockdown without putting in the measures like social distancing, as Dr. Nsiasare mentioned, the washing of hands and all these kinds of things, it's just not helpful because you lose economically and you do not achieve the objectives of the lockdown. So very important to put this in perspective.
All right. So Dr. Nsiasare, it took China, for example, 2 months before it started to complete the cycle. What timeline is Ghana working to?
What cycle are you talking about?
Where you start, the trajectory, you peak, and then you begin to flatten.
Yes. You begin to come down, not flatten.
Yes. You flatten the curve.
See, if you talk about flattening the curve, there are two things that you're talking about. The flatten the curve means that you use the number of patients who are positive who have been hospitalized as against the length of onset of the disease. But sometimes people confuse and talk about the flatten the curve also as the number of people who have tested positive.
Okay.
Not everybody who has tested positive is hospitalized. In Ghana, we are lucky that most of the people who have tested positive are either mild symptoms, asymptomatic to mild symptoms. We have very few patients who actually are in critical or severe conditions. So in Ghana, if you look at the flatten the curve, we are not doing badly according to the number of people that we have. Maybe it's because of their immune status, because they are relatively young, because maybe they don't have any other underlying illnesses. But if you talk about the testing, in fact, Dr. Amoisi was talking about the testing. Very soon we are going to introduce rapid testing, which tests the antibodies. What we are doing is that we want to make sure that any test that you are using is a genuine test and it's very specific and the high specificity. So that's what we are doing at Noguchi and the Food and Drugs Authority and KCCR. They are testing because we have blood of positive patients. We use it against any test which comes in, and then we accept the test. Once you start doing that, then we get the antibodies of the people who have been exposed or they are having active illness. We can then tell that this is the number of this area is where we have a lot of people who are sick. But what we are doing now, we are using the PCR test, which we now have 4 sites working. We are bringing on the CSR, we are bringing on the Veterinary Service Division, we are also bringing on the Tamale one, and then also one at Navrongo. Once we bring it on, we can then finish all the tests that we have done. In fact, this morning when I woke up, we are hitting about 44,000 or so of samples that we have collected, that we have tested, only about 15,000 of it. But once you add the antibody test, then we get the numbers, and then we can tell how high we've gone, and then we start. You don't want to, you want to peak and then fall quickly, because once you trace and test, which is a policy of Ghana now, based on science, then we know that anybody who is positive will be isolated, either at home or at treatment center. We don't want to reach a stage where we cannot flatten the curve, where we have a lot of patients coming more than the capacity that we have in this country. Because countries like Italy and Spain and this, and even almighty New York City has even fallen. So that's what we are doing. So that's what I asked the question about, what do you mean by flattening the curve? Okay. And then I've explained it.
Now Dr. Jansen, call it the corona time clock, 14 days, 21 days, countries are implementing, and lockdowns. What is the science behind it in fighting the disease?
Okay. The first is that the lockdown, there's a reason for it. The main reason is that, one, we want to break the chain of transmission and also contain what we already have.
Right.
If you don't break the chain of transmission, what it means is that virtually your entire country will be infected. And we cannot afford to handle such numbers. The Italys, the Spains are getting to a situation where virtually everybody is being contaminated. And that is what we don't want. So the earlier you go on the lockdown and your citizens actually obey the rules properly, you have the opportunity to break the chain of transmission, because all those who prior to the lockdown did not have the disease and potentially also don't have the disease in their homes, i.e. maybe your wife or your child may have it, even though the rest of the family didn't know. Then what it means is that all of you in that pool have been taken out of.
So we know that after the lockdown,
yes,
community infections have gone up.
Well,
where there was not infections, we have discovered infections. And we are now discovering in the double digits. My question is, are we not late in the approach? And when are we scientifically projecting to do the curve as other countries are doing?
Well, Samson, it's one of two things. The first is that the issue of being late and all that, I mean, Dr. Amuisi has spoken about it, Dr. Nsiasa has also spoken about it. But the cases we are picking in the community, we are picking them not because of the lockdown per se, but we are picking them because of the state's policy as of now, i.e. test. Using science and technology, we are able to zoom or zone areas that potentially have the disease. And then we also encouraging some voluntary testing within those zones. So that scaled up activity is actually what is giving us the results now. Let me give you an example. You see the quarantine group. Initially when they came in, some tested negative. After 14 days, or just about 14 days, we had 26 of them testing positive, even though initially they tested negative. So what it means is that some of these people actually went into the lockdown with the disease, except that they may have been at the early stages, or we have not even tested them at all. So now that we have the opportunity to test them, we are beginning to see the numbers. In terms of when are we going to hit the peak and then come down, I think that it will be very difficult for any scientist to predict now. The reason is that we have just discovered that we have community spread, and we are trying to chase the disease in our community to establish the true numbers. Now, if citizens also don't adhere to some of the measures that have been put in place, as announced by the president himself or the Ministry of Health and its agencies, then what it means is that even within the lockdown period, people will still keep infecting themselves because they are not obeying the rules. Under those circumstances, it becomes very difficult for you to even know the extent of the community spread. Earlier, you mentioned the fact that some parts of the country or regions that didn't have are also beginning to record cases. One is because of the testing. Two, it's also possible that when we had those mass movement of people from Accra to some of these regions, some of the people may have also carried the disease to those places as well. Because at the time, Accra, Kumasi generally were the epicenters as far as the country was concerned. So these are some of the things that we are beginning to grapple with. We haven't been able to define the extent of the community spread in its totality.
So shall we worry about the latest discoveries, including in the Old Fadama slum, news of infected persons evading, quarantine and treatment?
To an extent, that is a source of worry. The reason is that when you begin to escape from treatment and you go to other places, you go and associate with them, you don't also go into self-quarantine, then there's a higher chance that you may be spreading the disease as you move along. As we say, the disease doesn't move. It moves when we move. So if you have tested positive, you are refusing to, in quote, be treated, whether out of fear or out of sheer negligence or whatever, I cannot tell. But what you are doing to yourself is that, one, you are increasing the risk of you yourself getting to a position where you could end up with a complicated form of the disease because there's no form of treatment for you. And two, you are also putting the rest of us at risk because the people around you, as Dr. Isiasa described earlier, using the plantain cellar and all that, you may go around infecting people and they wouldn't know, and they also go home and infect their family, they infect their friends. So at this point, I think individuals should understand that they owe themselves, one, a responsibility, and also owe the entire community and the state a responsibility. Okay. If you have tested positive, please avail yourself so that we go ahead and do
in fact, if you don't avail yourself, you are committing a crime and you could be punished for that. Now, Dr. Nsiasa, what are we projecting? Do we have, a scientific way in Ghana by which we are doing the things we do? What is the trajectory that we are working to? Do we have timelines that we are hoping to terminate and open up?
Yes, we have timeline. In fact, everything we are doing, as the president said, is by science. We have a team of epidemiologists. We have divided into strategies. The first strategy was we all knew that the disease was coming from outside. So if you realize, on the 20th, I think the president then closed the borders and then quarantined people who came even before the borders were closed. And as he rightly said, we got 105 positive cases from this. These were potential people who were going to the communities to infect people without knowing. And most of them would have gone back. The next thing that we did, which the president did, was that now let's look at where the hotspots are. And he said that let's lock or limited lockdown of these hotspots. The whole idea, as he rightly said, was for social distancing, so there will not be plenty movement of people in the streets and in their house. Then you stay in your house. But once you stay home, you should also practice the social distancing. Luckily, I'm very happy that Ghana, we have now had a culture where now hand washing by soap and water is a thing that everybody is doing, and then people who can afford are also using sanitizers. Now I've realized people have even started wearing masks. Right. As you have made us wear masks here. Right. Because we have social distancing, but we are wearing the mask. That's your new principle here in this place, which is good. So apart from that, we are now doing what we call mapping. We are doing geographical mapping to see that there's a positive case here. So this positive case who is here, how many people has the positive case contacted and infected? And then at first we were waiting for the person who has a contact with a positive case to develop symptoms. That's what some of the countries are doing. But we have changed that and said that let's be aggressive and enhance this type of thing, and then test them as well. When we tested them, we've gotten when the president spoke, he said about 77 people have been tested positive. It's not from our normal surveillance system.
All right.
Our normal surveillance system has tested over 192 in Accra, but out of the 190 this and that in Accra, they still have about, Accra has about 52 people positive.
All right.
So that is the importance of what we are doing. Once we introduce, which is very soon, we are asking people who have the rapid test to come in. We introduce the rapid test. Then we can say that, look, this area, this municipality, that's where we have a lot of positive cases. Let's go in voluntarily. Anybody who wants to, his blood to be taken, just a prick, and then within 15 minutes, we tell you your test is positive. Then we know there are two types of antibodies. We have what we call the IgM. IgM means that you are recently exposed and infected. So you are infective, you are positive. Or you have an IgG, which is a built type of immunity. It means you have been exposed before, but maybe the virus is no more in you. What we do, the PCR test then can those who are positive, we then confirm it. PCR test can pick any smallest amount of virus and test that you are still active and you can be effective, and then we isolate you.
All right.
So this is where we can then tell that Ghana has reached the peak. And then once we are isolating and managing, I would say manage, not treat, then it means that flattening the curve is coming in, because you are not taking so many people to the hospital to overwhelm us. And then we achieve what we are achieving.
All right.
And I believe that with the science we have put behind, working together with epidemiologists, with scientists, with geographers, with case management group, we've brought in a lot of people who are advising. We meet them, we get the idea, and we advise the president.
Okay, so let me hear from Dr. John Amwesi. From Dr. Nsiasari, who advises the president, it does appear, like he said, everything is based on science, and so they would have an idea and would begin to ease up. What do you make of his analysis of how we seek to flatten the curve?
No, thank you very much for that, Samson. With regard to flattening the curve, it's important to mention that globally, the references to flattening the curve have to do with the deaths. So when we talk of flattening the curve globally, we're actually looking at how many people are dying and what's the rate of death, or the death rate, or in epidemiological terms, what we call the mortality rates. When you begin to see a steady mortality rate for a period of time, and then you begin to see that mortality rate decreasing, that is when you can say that you have flattened the curve or even bent the curve.
Okay.
Now, I can show you what we have here in Ghana. I don't know if it's possible for me to do a screen share on Skype. I'll just try this and hopefully it will work out. I don't know if you can see this clearly enough, but
yeah,
this is our graph of mortality, blue line. If you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. And this is the blue line of mortality. This is total confirmed cases, right? So what that should tell you is that it's very, very difficult for us to, at this stage, begin to talk about flattening a curve, because we just do not have that information available just yet. You can also look at the curve of new infections, but we do not have what is in place currently to be able to detect the rate of infections on a scale which you could refer to as reliable enough. So I would say that currently we do not have enough information to arrive at a conclusion as to whether we are flattening the curve or not. The little we have does not suggest that we are flattening the curve. It suggests that we are not doing badly at all. Even if you look at the rate at which our numbers double, it is technically one of the lowest globally. So we're not doing badly. I have to be very clear with that, but I also have to be emphatic that we do not have enough information to begin to talk about arriving at the peak and turning the curve or flattening the curve. That we cannot do at this stage.
Now, listening to the new double numbers, even in the slums, do you have fears that we will escalate?
Well, like Dr. Yancey mentioned, I'm very concerned about this situation. I mean, what do you expect? If someone is infected, if they really are, and this information coming from the Ghana Health Service sources, so I'll have to believe it, much as I would hope it's just a nightmare. But if someone is infected in a slum and is running away, you can only expect that there'll be more people infected and this could easily explode. This is a situation where I believe, and I believe strongly, that government will be extra aggressive, apply perhaps unusual measures and tactics to ensure that all those within that perimeter are rounded up and are tested and are given some amount of care and confinement, because if this gets out of that kind of community and continues to grow, it totally negates all the positives that we have made and could send us, skyrocketing and possibly out of control. I sincerely hope this will not happen, and I believe that the measures are being put in place presently, but it has to be extra aggressive. Dr. Nsiah talked about being aggressive, but for this particular matter, we need extra aggression.
Yeah. Well, I would ask Dr. Nsiah what informed the advice to the president to extend the measured lockdown only in time by 1 week and not geographical extension. What do you think informs that, and how effective is that? At the time we were placing the measured lockdown, there were places that we put the lockdown to that had recorded just 2 or so. Now we have new discoveries in greater numbers, so to speak, comparative by our numbers, and yet we didn't extend it geographically. What do you think informed that? How effective is that?
Is it a question for me, Samson?
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I think what Dr. Nsiah said was right. Doing this, doing it geographically, trying to identify the spots, concentrating efforts where there are positives. He talked about introducing the rapid test, and they're currently testing this at Noguchi and KCCR, where I sit, as he mentioned. What he mentioned was perfectly correct. But my concern as an independent scientist is we just do not have that information that would allow us to make any decisions regarding let me backtrack a bit. We do not have that information which will allow us to measure our curve, or to be able to say we are peaking, we are plateauing. Now, the decision to extend a lockdown or otherwise will have to be based on the curves. When you see that you're beginning to bend the curve, that is when you actually intensify your efforts, or you maintain your efforts at social distancing and locking down and all the other things. So the extension by a week is fine by me, and I believe the situation will be reassessed. I don't think anyone should blame the president if in a week's time he says, look, we've looked at the numbers and we think that we've got to double down and extend this lockdown. No one should blame the president, because as Dr. Nsiah said, they're going by the science, and the science showed that we needed to push further. I don't see how the science could suggest that, at the end of 1 week we're good to go. I don't know how that will happen. Maybe there's more I'm not seeing. But for now we're in a lockdown, and that's good.
Okay. So what informs this decision to only extend the time and not to extend to affect places where new discoveries are being made, and made in the double digits?
We see, as we've all been saying, locking down alone doesn't solve a problem. If you lock down and you don't do anything, you have done practically nothing. Once you lock down, you have to look at, you are locking down, and what are you doing with the lockdown? The first 2 weeks lockdown, which will end tonight, was done in such a way that we can enhance contact tracing and also enhance testing and the isolation and treatment. So the extra 1 week that the president said, which he said that after the 1 week he will review it again. So as Dr. Amoisi said, if after 1 week and then the science says that maybe this area, let's also look at the geography and locate this area and all this area. We are not only doing the lockdown in Accra, we've also been preaching the social distancing all over the country. As I said, we have also enhanced the testing in all the regions. That's the reason why we are talking about other regions. Like Eastern region was not part of the system. We had only one case, but now we know that Eastern region, we are confirming the cases to 28. I cannot tell you the figures right now because we are doing some confirmation. And the Eastern region, we know how the thing went to Eastern region. We know the index case from somebody who came from outside in a camp. And the camp, there are about 2 or 3 camps where the person has been to. And those are the people that we have tested.
In Central region?
In Central region, we also know that somebody also went there. It's a contact of somebody. The same thing of Upper East and Upper West, and then Tamale cases were the quarantine cases that we saw. So if you want to lock down the whole country, you know that it also has a social and economic impact. The president has always been saying that we want to do these things and look at the impact on the social life and the economy of the country. You can lock down the whole country, or you can lock down Accra for about 1 month or 2 months. If you lock down Accra in Kumasi, if you lock down about 90%.
What's our number in Central region now?
The number in Central region, as I know, is 1 confirmed case. That's what I know. You should wait until the Ghana Health Service put these things on website. I know that people have been going and listening, and they say nobody announces these test confirmations except from the strong room in Ghana Health Service.
But the regional ministers too have been announcing them as well.
We've been telling them. I don't know why every regional minister wants to go and announce that you have a case. It's good. They are doing education. The most important thing is education. Either you've seen a case.
So if these regions where we have detected or confirmed cases are allowed and they can travel from their place, intercity travel is allowed between them and the other places where there's no lockdown, what are we doing?
What you see, the most important thing, there are some countries who do not lock down at all. And people there, I know a country where they don't have any case because they have a big land, they have very few people there, so the social distancing is there. The most important thing that you should all stress is the social distancing and the hand wash and hygiene, and then sleeping well and keeping yourself.
But you know, social distancing is a luxury in some of these places. You know, particularly in the hinterlands, it's a luxury. And even in some of the cities, we know.
Yes,
it's a luxury.
Yes, I know. But the problem is that, you see, and the WHO Director General has been saying that if you lock down, you don't do anything. You should as well do whatever you are doing.
But if you are locking down, you should lock down effectively.
Yeah, but if you are locking down,
and it should be comprehensive.
Yes, you lock down effectively and comprehensively, looking at the socio-economic situation in the country. You can lock down the whole of Accra and Kumasi, restricted lockdown, nobody comes out, and something. After the 1 week, you come down and about 20 or 50 more people have died from the lockdown. You see, if you look at the economy of this country, about 90% of the people in this country are doing their own job. It's hand to mouth.
That's right. That's right.
So if you are not very careful, it will cause a problem more than...
What do you say? You issued a statement earlier, as in the Ghana Medical Association, and you were actually not looking at, you know, a limited lockdown in the manner it has been done. You appear to have been looking for a nationwide approach. What do you say at this stage? When will we get there, or will not get there at all? It doesn't matter anymore.
Well, I mean, our call was put out there, so everybody knows our position. But clearly, we can also see what government is trying to do. And that does not mean they didn't listen to our call, except that clearly the president is trying to balance the economic and social impact on one side and the health impact. But you can also see that the health impact has also been prioritized, looking at the way government is going about it. Clearly, they want to look at the hotspots at the epicenters and manage to deal with them within our own circumstances as a country. The only problem we have is that it seems to be such that the citizens themselves are not cooperating and obeying properly. The enforcement of some of the measures were a bit lax. And what we recommend at this point is that the president, having taken this decision in his own wisdom, that decision is welcome, but he should ensure that the security agencies and the local assemblies in particular enforce these measures to the letter. Without that, we'll run the risk of what Dr. Nsiasai said by quoting or paraphrasing what the WHO boss said, that if you lock down and you don't contain the measures or you don't do what you have to do, then you are as good as leaving everybody to walk around. It is up to us as a people now to ensure that within our own resources and our own, cultural circumstances, we enforce the rules such that we'll all be fine ultimately. If we continue to let people loose, I mean, some of the markets, as of last week, were just like without the lockdown. These places will have to be clearly either closed down or there should be more measures to control activities in there.
Have you seen food being distributed and how the people have had to crowd to receive the food? That's also dangerous.
Yes, Samson, I was involved, or I'm still involved in this food distribution from the private sector COVID fund.
All right.
We initially did about 10 to 15,000 in both Accra and Kumasi. We fairly did our best to ensure that there was some social distancing. But even within that, we saw that it was problematic. But the ones I'm seeing now, I think that we will need to find a new way of doing the distribution of the food. Else, the very things that we are trying to prevent will end up doubling the problems that we are trying to avoid. Reason, even before the food comes, the people have already masked up. At the point of distribution, everybody is rushing to get his. So in the process, we all come up together and then social distances is disregarded. Then when they get their food, they don't want to go home. They still hang around. I don't know whether to converse or expecting that there is more coming. I have no idea. So I think that the distribution, especially the national one, which is actually on a mass scale, the gender ministry, the local assemblies should ensure that they probably work very closely with the military and maybe the police as well, and find a way of demarcating the zones such that you won't have a lot of people moving from one zone to the other, and then when they are in one zone, you have very limited people coming out. If it means they're taking their phone numbers or whatever, you are called or you get to a zone, you are able to gather a few people, you give them their ration, and then you go to the next zone.
Let me show you a footage of how you, the private sector, COVID-19 fund, you did your distribution, and let's see if that can be used even as a standard. Let's watch this, and I'll come to Dr. Amosi shortly. So for those of you who are listening on radio, you didn't have the benefit. Those of you on television, you can see that the people, they've masked up. They run into each other, and those who are about to distribute the food are the ones trying to help them to stretch their hands and use that as a measure to social distance. And it looks almost practically impossible. They are in a queue, and each person is touching the other. You've seen that. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, so this is what I said earlier, that I was part of it, and even at that level, we realized that it was problematic. You can see what we were trying to do. We were telling them that you stretch your hands and make sure that you have that same distance between yourself and the person. So if this is your hands, let's say this.
Before they do that, this is their sardine packaging kind of queues.
No, that's
if somebody has it, they would have, somehow.
This is exactly what I said, that we found that even problematic, because to start off with, before they even get into the queues, they will actually be masked up before the food arrives. one or two of the instances, I got to the scene before the food arrived. They knew the food was coming, so they had already masked up. You try to talk to them, we used the community leaders and what have you, but especially when they see the food, things get out of hand. And we were doing our best, as you could see, to try and organize them in a way that social distancing will be observed. And it was pretty hectic. But I'm sure when we go to the next footage, where the general one is, you see that it's even more chaotic than that.
Oh, it's more chaotic, yes.
I'm not saying that this is the best, no.
Okay.
But all I'm saying is that we found it difficult even at our level.
Okay. Yes, Doc, what do you have to say about this?
What I would say is this is a typical nature of Ghanaians.
I think you've gone to the second one.
It is a typical.
Now we are looking at what the government, this is the government-sponsored one. Okay, so no queues, and this is chaos. This is chaotic.
Throwing
Yes,
food at people.
and the food is being thrown. It's being thrown at the people as they mass up. You can imagine some people will even fall on others and so on and so forth. Yeah, so yes, Dr. Isiasa, what do you say about this?
We've discussed it, and we've charged the Minister for Gender and Social Welfare to take care of it. You see, what you can do.
No, but see the way they are being throwing. How are you setting that someone is not taking double or even multiple?
It's completely wrong. Samson, it's completely wrong. It's not acceptable. If you go there and there's a chaotic situation there, if I will drive away and then come back again. Or we should use the community leaders. We should use the assemblymen, we should use the chiefs, and give them how many people do you have in this area. Then you tell you give it to them, and then you call them to come maybe to the house one after the other and pick it. But I also appeal to Ghanaians that, you see, this is a food ration that the government is giving through the faith base and also through NADMO and then the Ministry of Gender.
Okay, so if I may plead with the guys, stop showing it. It's not
horrible.
Good. Don't show it again.
It's horrible. I think this is not the best way to organize anything. And I believe that, as we discussed at one of our meetings, the minister, NADMO, the MCs and DCs and Metropolitan Chief Executive should take a very good look at this. Look at the footage, which is very bad, and they organize themselves very well. There are community leaders in every community. You can ask them how many people, and they gives you the number. The food can be given to the community leaders and call them one by one to come and pick it. And I also appeal to every Ghanaian that when you are going for these rations, don't take more than what you need. If you take 3 and all this, I'm sure that some of them will go back and go and sell to people. Take what you need. Be your brother's keeper. Make sure that you are taking what you want to eat and let other people come for this. But I believe that they should use the community leaders to do this thing. They know how to do these things and do it better. Because if you go to funerals, the same thing sometimes happens. But if there's somebody there who is doing it, that the food is there, you come, you don't even give it to the person, you put it on the table, everybody comes, say pick one, there you go.
Right.
You pick one and there you go.
Right.
You pick one, say the next batch.
There should definitely be a way by which it can be properly done in a much organized manner. Dr. Mosi, what do you say about what you have just seen?
Well, I think I can only join in the condemnation of the approach. I think Dr. Isiasa, who is a government official, has been very emphatic that he does not endorse this. I don't think anybody will. But it's also important not to miss what is important here, and which is the approach of being able to provide for those who are in need in this time. It's my hope that those who really need it are getting it. People are not taking advantage. I think these kinds of interventions are very, very important, very critical, must be maintained, must never be politicized, and ultimately must be done the right way. So I think it's very clear to everyone that we need to do better in this area.
So as we try to wrap up this segment, Dr. John Amosi, again, I'd like to find out from you, as we have just learned yesterday and today. Thankfully, Boris Johnson is out of the ICU. We saw him being driven on a stretcher from the ICU to another ward. As we understand, our commissioner High Commissioner in the UK, Papa Uso Ankuma, you know, is also being tested, and presently he's on a ventilator. I'm coming to the question of ventilators. This is a respiratory disease, particularly people with underlying, you know, issues, respiratory issues, diabetes, we are told, hypertension, we are told. An infection becomes more of, you know, a flame to ignite their circumstances and get them worse off. What do you make of our ventilator situation in Ghana?
Samson, this is a question that certainly touches a raw nerve, because it is clear that our capacity for ventilators here in Ghana is severely limited. Not only our capacity in terms of the numbers that we have, but also the manpower to be able to operate them. That being said, I can tell you we are definitely better off than several other African countries when it comes to ventilators. Let me just point out something. When you talk about underlying conditions, we do not know just yet how this virus interacts with underlying diseases, particularly chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and others. Because we've seen other people who have these underlying diseases who have come out, you know, unscathed. I mean, Harvey Weinstein, who was at Rikers Prison in New York, has hypertension and diabetes, has other heart issues, actually had a heart surgery before he went into prison. He's recovered from coronavirus. We know people who have had even transplants, so technically they are immunosuppressed. They have been on immunosuppressive drugs, and they have come out unscathed. So we still don't know how this really works, although we know that those who are dying are those who are elderly and who have underlying conditions. So speaking about ventilators, these are machines that are very expensive. From my last checks, average about 8,000 or so euros, US dollars a piece. All right. Places like the UK, the US, and others are struggling to build for themselves. We do not build ventilators in this country. So what I would suggest we can do immediately is to begin to look at our supply of just oxygen, all right? Because the first step will be to put somebody on oxygen, and then if they cannot breathe by themselves, you will sedate them, you will intubate them, that's you put a tube into deep into their lungs, and then you would make them breathe. You do the breathing for them while they are unconscious, all right? So what we can do is to ramp up our oxygen supply. We have the plants in Ghana. We know how to produce oxygen in Ghana. We just need to get more cylinders, ramp up production. We need to also get the breathing tubes and then the breathing masks. Now, I was just telling a colleague that I think we can make these in Ghana easily. We have the capacity to manufacture these masks. Okay. Technically, even if you look at the flexible tubes that are used by the plumbers, you can use these very easily to construct some tubes for breathing, right? So for now, I would say let's not put pressure on anyone to get in respirators because they're not going to be available anytime soon. What we can do is let's put into working condition what we have available. Let's ramp up oxygen supply, ramp up our production of masks for oxygen supply and tubes. This we can do in country, and just hope that we can do the best of what we have.
Dr. Nsiah, the ventilators issue, how is it central to what we are doing? And once again, I was listening to Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci, who has advised as many as 6, United States presidents on infectious disease, and he says corona, the COVID-19, is more dangerous than influenza because of the mode of infection, droplet and even aerosol. We have history to guide us that in 1918, 1919, we are told of the influenza that killed as many as over 100,000 Ghanaians. Like they say, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Ventilators define life in this disease.
What is our situation?
Yeah, thank you very much. The Ministry of Health has done a census of all the ventilators that we have in this country. But something, it's not only ventilators, it's intensive care units. If you talk about only ventilators, not every one of them will go on ventilator. You know, I'll digress more and then give you the phases of the disease. For the first 1 week, this the novel coronavirus causes what we call it's an infection phase. That's for the first 7 to 8 days. That's where the patient will then have all the signs and symptoms. Then after 7 days, they've realized from what the studies done in China and other places that there's what we call the inflammatory phase. An inflammatory phase means that the virus then attack all the linings of the alveolar and the lungs. And they have a lot of macrophages and activation of macrophages and also some biomedical things released into the alveolar and then destroys the linings of the lungs. And that's where there will be infiltration and a lot of fluid will come into the lungs, and then we need a ventilator. It is said that if you take 5 people who go on the ventilator, about one of them, only a very few of them survive. So you don't have to reach the stage that you need even a ventilator. And because of that, Roche, if you have to mention it, the Roche uses some medicine which is called Atemra, or what you call tocilizumab, which they use to treat rheumatoid arthritis. And that medicine then also is an anti-inflammatory, which will then stop the inflammatory phase. So they've realized that if you give that in China to people who are so early enough, they don't go into the inflammatory phase and they don't need ventilators. Professor Pranju, my very good friend and my brother who died, we realized that we wanted to give a dose of that drug to him. And we don't have it in Ghana. It's not even registered. We quickly have to register it. And we went looking for it. The only place you could get the dose for him is either at Kenya or from South Africa. But good enough, when we approached the president, we used the presidential jet within a matter of about 24 hours to go and bring the drug. Unfortunately, the time it reached here, my good friend was off. So that's what the president did. It went to Kenya. We brought the drug to the country. I went and picked it at 8 p.m. At 7 a.m. in the morning, I was told, my brother, my good friend is gone. So that is how you see the president is looking at it and saying, no, let's use the presidential jet and bring it. So if you get these drugs, which we are getting about some vials and keep, and then we can then give to people who is likely to go into this phase, then they may not need ventilator. But as much as possible, when the ministry also did the study on the ventilators, we realized we had about 75 ventilators in the system. The ministry has brought in about 25. We are buying more to put in the system. The president has also said that this has brought out that we should have a robust public health system. Ideally, every hospital, every regional hospital, every teaching hospital should have an intensive care unit, not only ventilator, an intensive care unit where patients can be treated, not only for coronavirus, but other diseases. And this is what we are working towards. And then ideally, with the public, of the private sector and all these people and the government, we should also have infectious disease, build standalone infectious disease centers in the 3 ecological zones. Apart from this, you see, if you realize, there's also CSM in the northern part of the country. CSM comes also in cyclical every 3 or 4 years. Then we have cholera. So we should have all these things done. In epidemics, we always say that epidemics and pandemic, no country, nobody gets fully prepared for epidemic. Everybody is late, including the big countries. So I would say that yes, Ghana, we may also have been a bit late. We should have developed all these systems early enough, even in a smaller scale. Right. But fortunately or unfortunately, we have some few ICUs, which is not big enough. Kolibo has some ICU beds. The Range has an ICU, but the new hospitals, we insist that there should be ICU beds where there will be ventilator. But as Dr. Amosi said, the most important thing is oxygen. Okay. Oxygen. If you have oxygen, you don't even have the ventilator. You can put oxygen on the patient, but the most important thing when the patient gets into the inflammatory phase is to take over the respiration. In fact, in some cases, they do what the extracorporeal pulmonary resuscitation, where they take everything out and then help the patient to breathe. But we don't want to reach that stage. And luckily for us, so far the patients the positive cases that we have, most of them are not in that critical or serious stages.
Okay.
That's a quick one.
Yes, those will be your final words as we make way for the next set of guests to come in to interrogate the measures so far and how we look to getting and easing up.
You see, Samson, what Dr. Isiasari said is very important. But I hope that as a country we are listening and learning. We at the Ghana Medical Association we've made this call for the creation of infectious disease centers in the country. The last major call was this year, but prior to that, when we had Ebola some 3-4 years back, we made that same call. And as our usual approach to life, the country did not really do what we had to do. I'm hoping that we are all learning from what is happening now. The good thing is, for now, we don't have a lot of cases that demand the use of ICU. Okay. But it is also because our numbers now comparatively are small. God forbid, if we should run the kind of numbers that other countries are running now, then we'll all be exposed. So investment into the public health sector or the health sector generally, we have to relook.
So presently the fact is that if we have 300 people who need to be on ventilators, we can't take care of
that is the truth as it stands now. Even the human resource who can run that set of activity, the ICUs you are talking about, or what we call the ADU, the high dependency unit, we haven't even trained enough manpower to do those things, because most of the hospitals don't even have them as of now. And these are critical areas that we need to pay attention to.
Yes, I said we are closing now, but can you tell us any information about my good friend, Dr. Ms. Papa Usankoma in the United Kingdom? How far is he doing?
What I know, he's doing well. He was in intensive care unit and he's doing well. We are all praying for him.
All right.
That's what I know. But something what I would say is,
and it's good to also note the effort the president made, which was in regard to Dr. Andrew. Is leading this fight to the end, and everybody has to help it. It was just said, "Doc, let's use the presidential." You wanted to say something?
What I will say is that I will conclude by saying that we should all adhere to the washing of hands with soap and water. We should also try to isolate ourselves and distance ourselves from each other, and keep our immune systems very right by eating balanced diet, having good rest, and also making sure that we have at the end of it all, we also have good updates from resource centers, not from social media. Go to the WHO website, Ghana Health Service website, you get the important information. And I will end by saying that at the end of it all, it's a duty of me and you to make sure that this disease doesn't go far. And then we should continue praying to the Almighty God. That where science fails, God will help us to achieve.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Anthony Isiasari, Presidential Advisor on Health. Dr. Justice Jansen, General Secretary, Ghana Medical Association. He's also a lawyer. And on Skype, we have Dr. John Amwesi. He's lecturer, Global Health Department, School of Public Health, KNUST, and leader, Global Health and Infectious Diseases Research Group at the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research in Tropical Medicine, KCCR. The Noguchi, if you like, in the southern sector of the country. Gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you so very much for helping this country, and to Dr. Anthony Isiasari and your team helping to, help the president to get a focus and to help us navigate these difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samson.
Thank you, Samson.
You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And as you know, here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. My guests next panel to continue the discussion and to look at the other aspects of the developments in our attempts to, in our fight to contain coronavirus. Osei Bonsu Dixon to my right. He is Chief Legal Advisor, National Security Council Secretariat, and Director for Media and Communications, Government Operation COVID Safety. Thank you very much for making time to join us.
Thank you, Samson.
Right. Also here is Kofi Abochi, Immediate Past Dean, Gimpa School of Law. On the phone, we will be joined by, or we are joined by Professor Peter Korte, Professor of Economics and Director, Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research, ISA, of the University of Ghana. Prof, thank you very much for making time.
My pleasure.
Okay, we also have Dr. Kwesi Enin, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Thank you so very much. So, first, from the national security perspective, this is the time that you are doing a lot of your work, not sitting by your desk, but having to go interface with the populace and try to ensure that people are complying, among other things. How has it been so far in your work seeking to ensure that everybody is compliant?
Okay, so Samson, thank you so much for having me here. And I would say that, well, we began, how do you call it, planning for this right after the president laid certain directives to the security intelligence agencies to plan for an operation such as this, the one that we have, the Operation COVID Safety. And so what we've done to effect it is to mobilize largely the security intelligence, the apparatus that we have for like defense, we've also for customs, immigration, Food and Drugs Board, Standards Board, and so on and so forth, into one cohesive whole. And then to design for the operation certain parameters and certain things which should be achieved within the operational time. I mean, bear in mind that the entire operation is characterized by the fact that this is largely a quest to constrain an infectious outbreak. And so it's not actually security, it's actually about a quest. And security is just an agent to be able to bring that, that disease or the infection under reasonable control.
And you have a wealth of knowledge, particularly in security law. And by the way, he's the author of this book, Dixon on Principles of Security Law, Text Cases and Materials, Law for Security and Intelligence Professionals. Now, where do you place security in such a national operation?
So, as I said before, it's important that we are able to achieve certain objectives. I mean, if you look at what the previous speakers on this, in this particular forum had said, we wanted to ensure that there was contact tracing. We wanted to ensure an environment safe and secure for that undertaking to be had. We also wanted to be able to quarantine people properly and ensure that they are in safe custody. Not only are they in safe custody, but they are cared for well, treated well, and then we get the numbers. And so the whole effort has been to then align the security service with a medical or a security objective. So mainly, that is what has largely characterized our focus. Right. How do we get the national security apparatus comprised of all these elements right under control and in support of the medical operation? Right.
And as you know, civil society, the private sector is also actively engaged in helping this particular fight. I have seen Mr. Kofi Abochi, for example, record in his native language a message on education to people to understand so they can, prevent getting the disease. So everybody is playing their role. So far, looking at the measured lockdown and how things have panned out, What is your assessment, and how should we look at things going forward?
Well, I think first of all, it's important for us to understand the fact that we are in abnormal times, and because we are in abnormal times, there's a need for some extraordinary interventions. I think in that respect, the actions taken by the government are both measured and timely. They are measured because they take into account the socio-economic and political configuration of our country and the need for interventions to reflect the circumstances of our time and the circumstances of our country. This is a global thing, and there's a danger that sometimes we may take actions that are not necessarily in sync with our country, but that reflects what has been done elsewhere. And so I think in that respect, there has been the attempt to contextualize the circumstances of our country. And so the partial lockdown reflects the circumstances of our country and reflects the economic circumstances of people. I think even that people are still struggling. And again, the consequential action of governments and of all concerned to try and assuage and to try and minimize the impact of the effect of the lockdown also reflects those difficult circumstances. I think that the measures are therefore within proportion. They are within proportion, and the review is also important. I think I need to commend the regular updates. We seem to have, I think the president has given probably more speeches to us than, if you put all that together, probably than the 4 years. He's speaking regularly. And that again reflects the emergency of the time. The fact that there's a need for us to have leadership, the fact that there's a need for us to see leadership. Leadership is not only in substance, but is also in perception. And so the fact that perceptually we have our leadership up and doing, and we see our leadership speaking regularly, and as it were, leading us in this fight, it's been called a war. And so we are all fighting a battle. The fact that I sit here today and I'm struggling to speak in a mask, and that keeps attaching to my lip anytime I breathe in and I speak out.
And you are tempted to adjust it.
That's
right. Advise you shouldn't touch it. And it's difficult.
We live in difficult times.
Yeah.
We live in difficult
I saw the
times,
doctors seated here, and they were all touching it and readjusting it. And I said, okay, we are told not to touch it, and I'm also trying to avoid it, but I can't.
We live in difficult times. I have to be honest. I had a bit of a conversation with your producer when he was trying to get me on the show. I was very reluctant. Today is the most reluctant time. Most reluctant moment for me being on the show. And I had to eventually do it because for God a country, we have to all play a role, like you said. But the fact that we have a disease that is evolving, the fact that we have a disease the medical experts don't even seem to know much about, and they are learning by the day. And every day we come out and we're informed that the transmission process is actually wider than was thought. Nobody wants to take any chances, so to speak. So I think my remarks are basically just to say that the leadership that has been shown in this respect appears appreciable, and things are in a flux. So we can just all hope that things continue up and down.
I'll get to Professor Korte so that we'll get to see the financial implications of what is going on, and we have also been hinted that the economy is likely to go into a recession, depending on how long this stays, and government has to continue to be sort of a Santa Claus to give out what it is doing presently. But before we go to Professor Korte, because we have mentioned questions of security and law enforcement, let me have Colonel Festus Abuaje, retired, who is also author, Conflict Analysis, and member, Council on Foreign Relations, Ghana. Thank you for your time, Festus Abuaje.
Thank you.
Right. So we understand. The last time you had some concerns, very genuine concerns about how the enforcement will be done. What do you say at this point? We have done 2 weeks.
But I think the first broad statement I would like to make is that on the whole, the security forces done well. The incident expected have been minimal. There are reasons and explanations for all that. they have been faced with a challenge. That challenge is the cooperation of the citizens, especially community, which would not necessarily necessitate the security forces coming down very hard on them. Part of the challenge has also been the organization behind some of the social interventions. And I think in the first segment you showed how, the crowd community was not so well organized. They were not controlled. The distribution itself was very haphazard in itself, inducing, that behavior from the crowd. And I think I could only see one police officer to my right of that crowd. So it looks like the security forces have been challenged in terms of numbers, to police the various checkpoints, the various roadblocks, and the patrols vis-a-vis the normal law enforcement duties. But on the whole, I think they've done pretty well.
Right. People say the security agencies, the law enforcers, are having a particularly difficult, situation because the exemptions that's been granted appear to be the problem. People want to go and buy food, you are allowed. You want to go and buy, groceries, you want to go and buy medicine, you don't need to show anything. All you need is to tell the security officer that this is what you're going to do. Is there anything that can be done beyond that? Because some also suggest that in the extension, they had expected a tighter regime for the lockdown.
There's a break, but if I heard you right, I would have expected that immediately after the president's remarks, 3 days ago, as we say in Akandeni Nansa, there should have been another forum or another platform where the security agencies, as we did in the first instance, should have elaborated a new conceptual approach to the enforcement of the lockdown. It's not too late, but the earlier we did it, the better. Let me give you one example. For instance, I mentioned that the violations have been largely communal. And part of it derives from the way our market systems are set up. So if you take Kumasi Central Market, I lived in Kumasi many years ago, but for several years. Who are the persons going to the Central Market to buy food, for instance? Kumasi Central Market, like many other central markets, are in logistical terms bulk breaking points or wholesale. So the system of markets that we have itself poses a challenge to the enforcement, i.e. we don't have smaller markets that serve smaller segments of society. And that, I think, is one of the challenges that have been faced both at Kumasi and at Kaswa and elsewhere. I mentioned the numbers. It's very obvious to me that if indeed, according to Brigadier General Yutia Abraham, that the Ghana Armed Forces alone has deployed in excess of 1,000, that's on the lower side. I don't know how many the police have deployed. But on the Sunday, the 5th of April, for instance, when I left my quarantine hotel, I got to ACP Junction. There was a checkpoint there. The checkpoint was manned by one single police officer. That obviously was not enough. At other places close to East Legon, I saw 2 police officers, 3, what do we call them? Those who wear the white shirts, the city wardens or city guards or something like that. So I think the numbers have been a challenge. And some communities have simply decided to violate, the regulations. I was told on the phone that Pokwasi, for instance, is as if nothing is happening. We've seen Kaswa, we've seen Malata Market, I think you showed it on your program, and so on and so forth. So in the kind of operation that DCOP Garba labeled as humanitarian, if you don't get the cooperation of the population, the citizenry, you might be forced now to resort to unnecessary use of force, which in itself would be a backlash or could be a backlash. And I want to actually warn against that. That using the word recalcitrance. But there are reasons why persons are being recalcitrant. And if indeed they are pushed to the wall, it's possible that they might react. And when communities react, I think we'll notice consequences, both in terms of the effort to fight this corona, as well as for national security broadly.
All right. Let's hear the President and the Finance Minister. And Professor Peter Kortey, you tell us whether or not the economy can sustain what is going on.
As part of measures to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on the social and economic life of the country, I indicated in my last speech, the government will absorb water bills for all Ghanaians for the next 3 months, i.e. April, May, and June. Furthermore, water tankers, publicly and privately owned, are being mobilized to ensure the supply of water to vulnerable communities. We have decided on further measures of mitigation for all Ghanaians for the next 3 months, i.e. April, May, and June. Government will fully absorb electricity bills for the poorest of the poor, i.e. for all lifeline consumers. That is free electricity for persons who consume 0 to 50 kilowatt hours a month for this period. In addition, for all other consumers, residential and commercial, government will absorb 50% of your electricity bill for this period, using your March 2020 bill as your benchmark. For example, if your electricity bill was 100 cedis, you will pay only 50 cedis, with government absorbing the remaining 50 cedis. This is being done to support industry, enterprises, and the service sector in these difficult times, and to provide some relief to households for lost income. Nevertheless, I urge all Ghanaians to exercise discipline in their use of water and electricity.
Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus alleviation program will primarily support provision of food and water for households and sanitation. 2, relief for health sector workers who are modern-day protectors and soldiers against this unseen enemy. And 3, soft loans for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to alleviate the disruption of our business people, informal, who represent 90% of our employees, beyond the cold calculus of the economics. Mr. Speaker, consistent with Article 177, Clause 1 of the 1992 Constitution, I am by this presentation submitting a request to the Finance Committee to grant us the authorization to assess the requisite amounts from the contingency fund to confront the challenge that has engulfed the nation in this matter of the COVID-19 affliction. Mr. Speaker, following this, the Ministry will take steps going forward to do the needful. Mr. Speaker, these are extraordinary and sobering times, and we must respond with a deep sense of social justice so that our very humanity is not compromised.
Right, so Professor Peter Kortey, is our economy capable of, containing this situation?
Good morning to you and your analysts and to your viewers as well. You ask a very interesting and difficult question, but I'll try to address it. Is yes and no. Yes, if we're able to contain this pandemic within the shortest possible time. However, if we should go beyond, let's say, 6 months, I think it's going to put a drain on our budget. Already, government has very limited fiscal space, and if we look at how much is being given, especially, find that it's going to be a drain on the budget. We are struggling to raise revenue. So are not operating. Some are operating at very minimal threshold, and therefore we need to cut our cost according to our size. I looked at what the finance minister presented, the 1.2 billion. I looked mine from 280 million going to support us in terms of food, and we also find health workers with find a lot of okay.
All right, so
and water as well. And quite recently, we had the president also saying that our electricity bill for the next 3 months would be waived or will be paid for. About 50% of the bill will be taken over by government, and for lifeline consumers, the entire amount. I think that is a lot of money to give out there, and it will be very interesting to look at our financial in this moment.
what would you say, you say beyond 6 months, but if it is within 6 months, after we have fought the pandemic, how will the economy look like?
Well, after the, we talk about recession. Recession normally occurs when you have consecutively a decline in growth for 2 quarters. So roughly within 6 months, if we're able to contain it, then that should be fine. Then we'll not really go into a recession. We are likely to come out. And immediately after we've put this under control, the economy will start aggressive production. And that comes to my point about this bailout that is going to be given to SMEs. If this is done very well, we assess them critically and look at the productive areas. There are some firms, no matter what you do in these times, they will not survive. There are some in these times, we do not get the most out of it. But there are some companies, if you really do the proper appraisal, credit appraisal, you will find that they are viable, and those are the ones we should support so that actively get into production as soon as this monies are released, and then as soon as we get out of the woods. If that is done, then even if we should go into some kind of recession, we'll bounce back as quickly as possible.
We are looking at a bit of, the formalized sector. How about the majority, which is the informal sector? And what happens to the tomato seller who is perhaps, because they are dealing in the food chain, they may still have some job, but everybody else will need some help. What should happen even in the circumstances?
Because you are very much right. The informal economy is about 80% of our total economy. So that is quite huge. Informal sector employs quite a greater proportion of our labor force. And therefore, if you just focus on the formal sector, you'll be making a mistake. You keep a lot of people out of business. Unfortunately for us, a lot of the informal sector workers or operators are not unionized, they are not registered. So trying to reach out to them becomes a bit of a problem. But I think we can still go ahead. A quick way is to find a platform. Perhaps we can even use the National Board for Small Scale Industries. If you go to their website, just like it's done in South Africa, they also have a similar organization where you are expected to register. So if the informal sector operator can register with the National Board for Small Scale Industries, or perhaps we can even use Maslow, existing systems, reach out to the informal sector. But these are not handouts that will be free money. But from what I hear, it has to be paid. So if you need to dish out money to any informal sector operator, there should be some assessment of whatever activity they are doing, some evidence that yes, they actually engage in some meaningful activity, economic activity. Then reach out to them. But we shouldn't limit it to just the formal sector. Also, there's an aspect I think we're overlooking, something. There are some middle class or middle skilled or highly skilled workers who have lost their jobs as a result of this pandemic. You find the hotels, the restaurants, most of them are either shut down or operating at a very minimal level, 10%, 20%. You find teachers in private institutions who have lost their jobs. You find importers and exporters. A lot of our traders go to China, Dubai, and many other places to import and sell to make a living. But a number of these people have also lost their livelihood. What do we do? I don't think we should leave them out. I've always said that the UK, for instance, guaranteed 80% of wage or salaries of private sector employees. In Ghana, we don't have the fiscal space to do that. But at least something to keep body and soul together in these times will be very useful, because within our limited budget space.
What do you say to those who suggest that electricity bills, for example, lifeline users, getting complete, waiver assets where the government will absorb their consumption? I think from what I understand, that is people who are consuming and paying in money terms, not more than 20 Ghana cedis in a month. That's 19 Ghana cedis or so. That is okay to cushion the vulnerable, because there are some of them who need to go to work each day before they can feed. What do you say to those who suggest that there is the other group, the middle class among others, who may have been able to, who have savings that they can, as it were, draw on, and therefore the 50% is not something the government should have even contemplated, because the electricity sector is already burdened with a lot of debt?
Well, they may have a point there, but you see, I have seen a lot of people hail this policy. I think it's a good gesture. However, in other jurisdictions, in times like this, you get people to register, those that have lost their jobs to register, because in this wholesale subsidy, those actively employed will get subsidy. There are those who are taking their salaries, nothing is happening to them, they take a subsidy. And there are those who have lost their jobs. And then, of course, you mentioned the lifeline beneficiaries. They basically work hand to mouth. With this lockdown, a lot of them are at home, actually. So it's not just about electricity. When you look at the basic necessities of life, is food, water, and clothing. So if you pay my electricity bill, and well, if I'm lucky and I'm able to go and join the queue, the crowd, and fight and get a pack of food, at least I've had food. But what about shelter? What about other things, toiletries? So I believe ideally, if we could register, get people to go online, and at least have some basic data, then we can target them a bit more, or target them better. We have failed in targeting this country, and I think this should be the time to take advantage and ensure proper targeting.
Okay. We'd like to thank you very much, Professor Peter Korte. Unless you have a few words extra and any advice further as we go further, because there's an expectation that we may even have a further extension after the 1 week. Then you can take leave of us.
Thank you. I think I would advise fellow Ghanaians to be law-abiding. This thing is for all of us. So if you have to stay at home, just stay at home. I find the market too crowded, and it worries me. I find people behaving as if there is nothing at stake. I mean, when I see not just even the masses, even on TV, you find people who are supposed to know better, holding press conferences, doing all kinds of things, and there's no social distancing. I think it's about time we take this very, very serious. Otherwise, we will not be able to contain this virus in a good time for us to turn our economy back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Sebunsu, what do you say particularly about the last bit that Professor Peter Kwete had to say about, you know, people's attitudes in complying to protect themselves and everybody else?
So I think, Samson, I mean, mainly I would say that I think Ghanaians are struggling to come to terms with the nature and character of this virulent virus that we have. And that is actually telling. It seems to me that the message hasn't drowned or come home full horse. And so in a certain sense, I mean, the horses aren't actually being reined in. I mean, and you could rightly see that when you see exactly what is happening in our markets. So, for example, I mean, at the very outset, you had police deployment of roughly about 2,870 that were deployed. You had military deployment of about 2,200 that were deployed. As I speak, we have in excess of 8,000 policemen that are actually on the streets. And you also have more than 4,000 military personnel that are on the streets. The markets that we have are still mushrooming and still, how do you call it, becoming larger and larger. And so the behavioral aspects of human beings with respect to policy issues sometimes also take a turn that makes dealing with a particular problem sometimes much more problematic than it otherwise would have been. So that is the first thing that the security establishment is actually grappling with and seeing to put under caps. I heard, for example, I think it's Colonel
Festus
Abuaje allude to the fact that they need to go back, pick the plan, dust it, and perhaps see what more can be done. It's when you run an operation, and he knows it as well as I do, that you keep on monitoring. In fact, when you push an operation into motion, you push into motion also a monitoring team. And so, by and large, your assessment is something that it's quite fluid. I'll give you a typical example. So the very first day, for example, I mean, from an operational perspective, was far too difficult and challenge. Because one, you didn't have the numbers required on the streets. You also didn't have the force structure on the street. You didn't have coordination issues were also there. But subsequent to that, there was a sea change. A lot of reviews were done, assessments were quickly taken, and then we should also bear in mind that while all these things are going, normal law enforcement activity is also in hard currency. I mean, it's something that is going around. So, for example, around the country, I mean, these normal law enforcement issues, calm life operations are still going on. So, all these kinds of things put a lot of strain on the existing resources that you find. He rightly said that you go to some and then you find that you don't have the full complement. I mean, so those kinds of things are being addressed. I think that in the fullness of time, we would have a wrap on those things, yes.
Yes, so, Mr. Bochi, when you look at the security operations so far, what for you do you pick out to be the challenges and how do you think they can look at them? I look at an aspect of it. I'm just reading how many people have been, you know, as it were, remanded. And I'm saying these are people outside and we have added them to the people inside. What are we thinking about? What is going on?
We are in uncharted terrain. We need to recognize that. There are so many things we have no answers to. Those in prison themselves, there are even questions about them. They were imprisoned, and they were imprisoned and kept in a particular place. Their freedom of movement is what was curtailed. They were not in prison to be exposed to danger. Therefore, those in prison maybe in principle have a claim to be released, because there are allegations making the rounds that the virus may have entered the prisons. True or false, I don't know about that. But, you know, whatever it is, we are in uncharted terrain. Now, if we're in uncharted terrain, those at the helm of affairs they themselves are confronting the difficulty of uncertainty, which we have. The least we can do is to cooperate. We should remember that the enforcement of the lockdown is not arbitrary. It is on the basis of law. There is an imposition of restriction law that has been passed. Therefore, it's a requirement that people should stay at home pursuant to that imposition of restriction and pursuant to the executive instruments that have been passed in respect of that. Because we are in uncharted terrain, the Constitution itself, and even the rights that are given to us, all these are dealing with that uncertainty, and it is our responsibility to cooperate. Look, we live in a constitutional era, and with the Constitution doesn't contemplate that there can be police brutality, that you can have the military on the road and playing police roles and also administering some level of violence if there is at all. And all kinds of videos are making that. Whether these are true or false, for me, that is not what I address at this stage. What I address is that cooperation is key and vital. And the idea that citizens can unilaterally...
Okay, you'll have to pause. I'll come back to you. I understand I have a little difficulty with your microphone. But this program is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of MTN Everywhere You Go, Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner, Amen Scientific, God is the healer, Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows, Core FS, your immune booster, We Lead, we build homes for you, and Joy Learning, keep learning. We will take a quick break and we'll adjust Abochi's microphone, and we come back to continue with the discussion on looking at the security, social and legal, aspects of the measured lockdown, which has been extended by one more week. Right, you're welcome back. This is Newsfile. Thanks for staying with us. And my guest, Osei Bonsu Dixon, who has been working and in charge of the national security, from the national security perspective on the Operation COVID-19, and Kofi Abochi and Colonel Festus Abuaji on Skype. Now, you were assisting us to understand, and you sought to mention how, for example, people are being added onto perhaps the prisons and on remand, and the fear already that something may be there.
Right.
So how do we navigate all of this? Because people are violating and they must be dealt with. If they are being remanded, that's lawful.
They have to be dealt with, but it's important for us to remember we're in a certain circumstance. There's a law that has been passed restricting people's movements. Now, if this law is violated, and is violated en masse, if we have the numbers of people who are out there, as we're being told, violating the law, the criminal justice system is going to be compromised, is going to be challenged. Already, our prisons are overflowing with prisoners. The police stations do not have enough holding cells capacity to contain the numbers of people who may violate it and may probably have to be released after a day or two having been kept at the police station. So we get to a point where the criminal justice system simply cannot contain the numbers of violations if you have mass violations of a particular law. And that is why it's important at this stage that we appeal to the consciences of people to simply be law-abiding. Criminal justice is only effective if the deviants are few, if they're in the minority. But when you have a number of people, too many people violating it, then you have a problem. Now, there's a psychosocial aspect to this. There must be a sense of ownership as far as what is happening is concerned. Our children, ourselves, our families, our older people, all kinds of people to whom we owe responsibility. This disease is not just about you. It is about your prospect of spreading it to people who have nothing to do with your irresponsibility, your recklessness, or your misbehavior. And that's why it's imperative that we do not talk strict law at this point. The law has been passed, and so technically speaking, what is being done is actually legally sanctioned and is legally allowed. So whoever is in violation should not simply take advantage of the crowd and say, well, if you have too many people violating this, we can't be arrested, so let's just go and do whatever it is we want to do. At the end of the day, you're actually imperiling not only your life, not only the life of the community, but overall of the country. So criminal law is not the answer to this. The violations will not necessarily be met by arrests and prosecution, nor is police brutality also the answer to that. So we have to have a compromise. And that compromise is we need to have a sense of ownership of the process. Everybody is a stakeholder in this. And if the collectivity believes that it is our collective behavior that will ensure that we're able to overcome this deadly disease, which has been described as the unseen enemy, then all of us should just own the process, or rather own the sense of compliance, as opposed to resisting it, because resisting it is simply actually signing a pact to the virus, and I don't think that is in anybody's interest.
Is there not the danger of people being arrested for violation when in fact it is their genuine circumstances that lead them to being arrested and being labeled as violating the measures?
And by genuine circumstances, you mean, for example, going to the market?
A policeman doesn't understand me. I say, I'm going to do X. A policeman says, I don't trust you. I don't think you're able to do this is what your intention is. And he picks you up, he takes you away.
Right, and that's what I spoke about when I mentioned the psychosocial aspect of this. It's a psychosocial in the sense that people must believe that the enforcement is in their interest in order for them to comply. At the same time, the police must also have the sense of duty to administer the law, to administer their duty in a manner that is appreciated, if you like, by the common person who finds himself at the other end of the law in this respect. But if there's a sense of repression, if there's a sense of brutality, then there will be resistance. And that's part of the difficulty. And so this is where you need to have police training and professionalism at its optimal best. Because once there's that sense of repression, and once there's that sense of brutality, that someone is trying to curtail our liberties, not in our own interest, but because of an ulterior agenda, then you're going to have a resistance. And once you have the resistance, then we're in a difficult terrain. So I think at this stage, what we need is to have that psychosocial aspect of law enforcement at its optimal best, where people believe that what is happening and the enforcement of the law is in the best interest of the citizenry, of which that person is a micro unit of the overall Ghanaian polity. But if there's that sense of repression, that someone is abusing his rights, or rather someone is abusing his authority, and basically is not. And I've witnessed a few instances where sometimes I think the communication may not have been quite at its best.
Right.
And but again, what can you do in the circumstances of what we find ourselves? Our police people, not all of them are as well trained as we'll expect. And so certainly we can't expect that they have become angels. We should give them time. But ultimately, let's just remember that the police themselves are putting themselves at risk. I mean, they stand on the street, they encounter all kinds of people, they interact with all kinds of people, and they are doing their possible best to ensure that the streets are clean of people and that all of us stay at home so that the virus doesn't spread. And if we are fighting the police, not only are we endangering them with the physical interaction by way of our not complying, but we forget the fact that they are exposing themselves by standing on the street to help the whole country scale this difficult tide. So I think we should look at the bigger picture and stop being a bit resistant.
And Osebos, who is itching to say something, I don't know what you want to say in addition to what he's saying, because you are the guys who are sort of, responsible at the forefront and making sure that, what Colonel Festus Abraje and others are preaching, some democratic policing, is what goes on.
Yeah, so in part, what Kofi is talking about is something that I really subscribe to. what I want to add to it is that we are, yes, in uncharted waters, but we are not actually in uncharted waters when it comes to operational, how do you call it, deployment.
Right.
So this is one aspect of operational deployment which is not entirely new to the police service. Neither is it new to joint force or maybe joint task force operations. So to that extent, they have experience and have battle readiness for that kind of issue.
But obviously not normal times, because national security will not interface with us the way you are doing in these times.
No, absolutely. I mean, that is it. I mean, this is a very, so it's a novel situation, okay,
right,
to that degree. But I'm talking about the fact of police and military forces joining task forces together to be able to work and come to some good understanding about the situation and help us out of it. Now, what I want to say is a couple of things. One is that in all operations, citizen cooperation is very, very important.
Right.
And so one would observe that, for example, I mean, there's been a lot of effort made into communicating the fact that it is a humanitarian operation and that our citizens need to comply out of a sense of duty. A sense of duty is required on her. We ought to see it from that perspective. Now, the laws and the rules are also very clear. And so the issues about, how do you call it, arresting people is also something to be talked about.
Right.
It's something actually on the drawing cards. I mean, there are people who've been sent, for example, I'm aware, I've got reports, C-trips about people who've been sent to Fadama Magistrate Court, Kaswa and co. So all those kinds of things, you cannot leave any facet of it and say that, well, maybe the places will be overpopulated. So we would have to take some action really against that.
Right.
For example, I mean, apart from the fact that you're dealing with fiscal situations, the situation is also such that a lot of people are also taken to cyberspace. And so you have virtual actions that are taking on a new form of it's taking some kind of infractions are being organized in virtual spaces. You're seeing fake videos, for example, pop up and all those things. Now, for a lot of, for example, these fake videos, and I want to make this kind of comment, a lot of videos that we have seen, in fact, we've taken about like 36 videos to particularly study and to see. I mean, you would see two main strands of issues there. First being videos that are out of context, taken from one context, voiced over, and then made to apply as if it's part of operation, COVID safety, handicaps or problems and things like that. I mean, we've seen that type of videos. We have also seen videos, so those are videos that really do not, they have no real connection with the event except the misrepresentation that is being carried forward. If you take that apart, you're dealing with some infractionary behavior on the part of the forces, actually on the street. That some of those things are fact. And there are a few of those things that one can talk about.
Okay.
But even so, I keep telling people that, so for example, you have about, statistically, you have about you have about like 2,000 spots where security forces, for example, can be found. I mean, at various checkpoints, snap checks and things like that. If you add all those kinds of things together, nationwide, you hear, for example, that police have encounters with the civilian populace and or the military has had some contact with them, and and maybe have acted untowardly towards them. I mean, punish them in a manner that isn't appropriate. Some call it brutalities and things like that. If you sum up the number of those ones, as against about a 2,000 deployment, I mean deployment in specific areas where we want them to be positioned, you have about like 10 such actions maybe at any one time going on. It pales in complete significance to the broad, well-organized operation that is actually on the ground.
Okay.
And so the infractions that you sometimes find, I mean, even if you pick videos, for example, about 80 to 90% of videos that you're seeing are actually are fake. You are left with about some another 10%.
That's terribly dangerous. Let's get to Festus Abuaje, and I wanted to find out, you seem to be generally satisfied with how far they have gone with the operations, seeing that there's likely that we may extend, or it might even go to geographically other places where they are not under lockdown already. What would you say by way of your advice in the approach of the security enforcement of the lockdown?
Well, let me first make a statement on the point of the fake videos and all their genuineness and so on and so forth. See, in this kind of environment, it is not the numbers of fake versus genuine videos. It is the impact on the psyche of the population. So even if there is one genuine video, let's take it the one the psyche of the Ghanaian population is that forces have shot a civilian. So it's not about the numbers. And indeed, the government should not focus on disputing the numbers of. The authorities must focus on effective, constructive, public information, about those few videos that are genuine. Let me leave that. Part of the challenge for the security forces is that there is no organization. That has been said. It's come out very clearly during the second segment and some of the remarks made by Dixon and Professor Aboki. We need some organization. So, if today, for instance, food is going to be distributed, I cannot see how food can be distributed to any community without the involvement of the community itself, i.e. the assembly or the unit. It's very unfortunate that some highly placed persons, political entities, have said that we cannot entrust this food distribution to assembly members because not all of them are part of our party. But this coronavirus, time and again, has been explained that it doesn't know political coloration. It just knows human beings to target. So I think whether we like it or not, we need to bring in the element of community engagement. And through community engagement, the security forces versus NADMO and other actors from the Ministry of Social Affairs, whether they are the project officers and their implementing partners, i.e. those persons who are delivering the food, must engage with the community leadership. It makes the work easier for the security forces than for the security forces now to apply their effort in social distancing and controlling crowds that are out of proportion. If we can work on that organization, I think the public health objective will be attained and the security objective will be attained. Let me bring out another dimension that probably we're all overlooking. And it is a dimension that security forces are not superhuman beings. They are as susceptible to this virus as anybody else. And I don't think all of them, as required, have been issued with the appropriate protective gear, i.e. whether face mask or hand gloves or whatever it is. The earlier we did that, the better. And when we talk about face masks, we are told that every 5 hours or every day or so, they've got to be changed. The question is, since this operation started, according to the numbers given by Mr. Dixon, if 4,000 of them have been deployed, have we issued every day 4,000 face masks to these security forces? Every day. If not, are we not endangering the very personnel who are supposed to now ensure that there is control?
Right. In fact, when I was driving here, I saw some police officers, they had no masks. And I think the situation is not different in many other places.
Listen to you.
Okay, you can end on that note, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. That's fine.
Thank you very much. Festus Abuaje, retired, helped us to analyze a bit of the security situation. But there's some bit of question I actually wanted to, ask him about it, but I felt you may address that a lot more appropriately. The people we are arresting, of course, the people who violate, when we take them to court, by the law, when it's supposed to be a summary, trial, can't we this time ensure that we are actually doing summary trials? You arrest people, they go to court, instantly the process rolls out, it finishes quick, so they know their fate. And if they are convicted, rather than put them in some cell or jail, let them do some community service in a COVID-19 operation. Can't we roll out something like that immediately?
Unfortunately, you can't, because the thing about judicial proceedings is that they are regulated by law. First of all, the Constitution says that everyone who is arrested or detained is entitled to legal representation. I've been told to stop doing this, but I can't keep coming down. Is entitled to legal representation. So everyone arrested, whether in an emergency context or not, is entitled to legal representation. Now, once they go to court, their lawyers are also allowed to take advantage of all legal tools there is in defense of their clients. And that's where the delay normally starts, interlocutory applications, all kinds of legal battles.
But the law provides for summary trials.
Absolutely. But summary trial doesn't imply that you ignore legal representation and you ignore legal rights that are allowed a person in a proceeding. Normally, it is the legal rights that are allowed you in legal proceedings that cause the delays.
So can't we have the legal representation, everything done, and make sure that this is done very fast?
Well, that it can. The court has to decide how it sits, and that's what the problem is. If the court wants to do an extended sitting, the court can. Okay. Instead of sitting and rising and coming back after a week, if the court decides to sit 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row, they can dispose of these cases. That can be done. The question of the penalty, again, this is a question of law. If the law allows for community service, then that can be done. If the law allows for fines, of course, that can be administered.
The law doesn't mention community service.
That's what the problem is. We don't have these, what we call alternative sentences. We have very limited sentencing in Ghana. And so either fines or custodial punishment.
And this law simply says if you are found guilty, you are paying a minimum 12,000 and a maximum 60,000.
Right.
Or you go to jail.
Correct.
Up to 10 years.
So there's a custodial punishment or there's a fine. The law goes by the old approach, which is problematic. If the law had given the alternative discretion to the judge to decide how he punishes you,
so once that would have discretion, we cannot contemplate this. You are either paying 12,000 or between 12,000 and 60,000, or in addition to that, you can get 4 years or up to 10 years in jail. Now, national security, and I'll come to Abochi to end with. There's some development that we may not be paying attention to, but Professor Peter Kote mentioned it. People are losing their jobs. How are they losing the jobs? We know about the legal principles of force majeure and frustration coming into contracts with people and so on and so forth. How should the employers and the employees negotiate these situations in such a way that it doesn't hurt the employer too much and doesn't hurt the employee, or it doesn't lead to legal battles after COVID-19 or even right during COVID-19. But in your case, national security, we have known you to make interventions in food, and water supply and distributions. Are you involved in these things as well? Professor Kote also mentioned that we may come to a time where it's not just the food that the people need that you have to supply. It's not just the water and electricity you are paying for, but there may be need for toiletries, other things. What are you guys thinking about?
Okay, so to look at the first point that you raised, I mean, about whether maybe national security can make incursions into, how do you call it, largely private arrangements or maybe contracts that are done. Maybe
no, I was asking that Abochi will address.
Oh, I see. Okay, so primarily you are interested in our interventions in the area of, we're interested in humanitarian accompaniment to whatever operation that we're launching, because I mean, like you rightly have seen, NADMO is part of this operation, and so NADMO maps out the catalog of things that the various needy communities must be should be served with or should be given and things like that. So they come out with those kinds of lists. Really, that isn't something which devolves to us. So the National Disaster Management Organization, every year for all hazard situations, comes out with those kinds of, they have the parameters. If it moves into certain escalatory issues that require particular forms of like types of food, blankets, or if it transcends blankets and moves into, I don't know, maybe any other thing, maybe for housing, I mean housing purposes, where people should lie, where, you know, it's actually their province.
Okay.
And it's something that they would discuss with us for us to help to expedite it. Now, let me say one of the things which comes out of operations like this. So, in the first instance, we act as a coordinating center to ensure that government's response is not only enabled, but is effective. So the efficacy of the responses that government gives. So that is it.
So in your coordinating, are you ensuring, for example, that the police personnel or the COVID-19 personnel out there are getting their masks, they're getting changed? Because you're seeing a lot of them around town. They don't have anything, they're not wearing masks. They're already endangering their lives. Professor Sabuaje asked that question.
Oh yes, so that's something that is, so the first obligation that we have is to protect the Ghanaian people.
Okay.
The people who run to rally support for them are personnel whose importance we can't overemphasize.
All right.
So constantly in our meetings, one of the things that comes up is a PPE issue. And the PPE issue is not by no means actually left to, I mean, there's no shortage of it that is only referable to health personnel. It is something that today, as we speak, cuts across all first responders. I mean,
all right, we are running out of time, but if Abuchi will address the question I was asking briefly, should employers just unilaterally say, you are terminated because COVID-19, we can't work? Can they actually do that?
From a strict legal perspective, yes, they can. From a strict legal perspective, frustration of contracts, the contracts can be discharged on grounds of frustration. And frustration can happen by reason of what you call a force majeure. A force majeure happens where a fundamental event has happened which was outside of the contemplation of the parties to the contract, but which has rendered the performance of the contract impossible. So if that happens, as it seems to have happened in this case, employers are allowed in principle to do that. But that's the strict legal one. The one I would speak of is the pragmatic one. The pragmatic approach, in my opinion, should lead to rather a suspension. So contracts should go into suspensory mode. I would expect at this stage that trade unions together with employers will sit and negotiate pragmatic models that will keep contracts suspended until times are normalized. But the idea of mass termination of contracts, even though strictly speaking in law, that is allowed. I suspect that in the circumstances of what we find ourselves, if the matter even comes before a court of law, the court may take a more pragmatic approach. That, you know, one of suspension as opposed to termination.
All right. Thank you very much. And I guess for the second segment have been Osei Bonsu Dixon, Chief Legal Advisor, National Security Council Secretariat and Director for Media and Communications, Government Operation Covered Safety. Kofi Abochi's immediate past dean, the Gimpa Law School. Professor Peter Kote also joined us with ISE at the University of Ghana, and of course Festus, Colonel Festus Abuaje retired. I'm Samson Ladia Yanine, as always. Have a good afternoon. Let's all take care, be safe.